Hi, it's Matt from Media Arts. We're going to take a look now at the Zoom H5. So this is a handheld portable recorder, or handy recorder as they call it. And from the get-go, I'm just going to mention that actually we do have better options than this, namely the F4. And the main differences between the two is that with the H5, you have to actually hold it with your hand or come up with some elaborate way to mount it somewhere. It does have a mount option. However, this is really designed as a handheld recorder, and as such, one of your hands is actually tied up holding the device, and that's not ideal, so just be aware of that. It does have inbuilt mics that the F4 doesn't have, which can be quite good for very quick interview type recording because they're sort of designed to point at 90 degrees. So one is capturing me and the other is capturing someone speaking fairly close, like a journalism situation or documentary. However, that really is only if you don't have permission for someone to wear a microphone, or you maybe don't have a boom operator. It really is a very quick gung-ho solution. So that's the main drawback, really. The second big drawback is that it's only got two inputs at the bottom. Now this is for external microphones, such as a boom or a lapel microphone to feed in there. And actually, as long as you have it on 4-channel mode, you can actually record using the onboard microphones and the two external inputs at the same time. So that does give you 4 channels, but it's only 2 external channels. So bear that in mind. That's quite a big limitation if you're on set. You're going to need at least 4 inputs if you want lapels and a boom on there as well. So that's the second drawback. The third main drawback, in my opinion, is that there just aren't enough output options on this device. So that means that there's no problem recording into it. It's just if you want to share what you're recording in real time with your director or someone on crew, or maybe you want to feed a camera with what you're recording for Scratch Audio Sync, or you just want to try and get the sound right there and then and feed it straight onto the camera for encoding. It's very hard to do that on this because you don't have professional XLR outputs. So that's quite a limitation. It wouldn't be acceptable on set to not be able to share what you're doing with the director via the director's audio kit, or basically just feed into someone else's input feed from your outputs. So that's quite a major limitation. Also, they're quite fragile and they're just a bit, you know, sort of not intuitive to use on set because of the fact that you've got nowhere to put them. So that would be my summary of why you might go for an F4 instead of a H5. However, there are certain situations that you might want to use this, so this might be useful anyway. And we're going to take a look now through the settings of the F5. I think it's quite helpful to actually look at the menu first and then go through the options on the outside of the body, because you'll understand a bit better after having been through the menu how you're interacting with those settings. And just want to mention as well that the top of this comes off. The two microphones at the top, you just press the buttons here and they just slide out. So you can actually remove the head of the device if for whatever reason you're not using those 2 microphones on the head. So that being said, these are still quite handy, as the name implies, and you can still achieve quite a lot with them in certain situations. So let's take a look at some of the features. We're going to turn it on and we're going to get to know all of the settings, and we're going to have confidence to use it out on set. So first things first, we're going to turn it on by using this switch here, and we just pull that down and it turns on and it boots up. It checks the card, it checks the formatting of the card and makes sure that it's ready to write to the card, and it turns on pretty quickly and you can record more or less straight away. But before we look at recording, this is just changing between the inputs 1 and 2 at the bottom and the left-right microphones at the top. Before we go ahead and do that, we're going to set the recorder up, because be very careful. If you turn on one of these recorders or a camera or anything digital that you're getting from the stores, you've got no idea how it's been left, what condition it's been left in from the previous shoot. And you've got no way of knowing that it's set to the right settings as per what you want to do. In fact, it's always better to assume that it's completely messed up from whoever was using it last, and it's in an unusable state when you get the device. So just be very careful of that. And that's why we have a very logical checklist to go through every time we take one of these devices before we use it. You should never use these devices without checking through the menu, which is why here we're going to look through the menu before we actually record or do anything there. So the first thing to think about is, well, let's set the device back to its factory default settings. And the way to do that, as per many options in the menu, is to use the menu switch here, and then we've got a scroll wheel up and down, and we can also press that in, which acts as a select button. So it's designed quite well in this regard. If you're right-handed, you simply hold it here, and you've got the menu button here and the toggle here, so you can stay focused on the screen, and the backlight comes on there. We can actually change the backlight duration settings as well. So before we reset this, and I'm actually just going to take the SD card out for now, because I've got some important audio on there that I don't want to lose. So just to, as a fail-safe, to prevent me from formatting that card, I'm going to take it out and leave it there. When we do that, we lose the record duration settings. So it knows when there's a card inserted, and when the card is in there, it should reappear as to the remaining duration of the card and the name of the file on there if there is one. So I've got a file on there, so the name appears. And we've also got our record setting, which is WAV, uncompressed audio, at 48 kilohertz samples, that is, at 24 bits bit depth. And if you want to know more about what that is, it's a resolution of conversion from analog to digital. And you can read about that in the Universal Audio Principles document that's on Moodle. So just follow up there if you want to know why it's important that that is the minimum audio resolution that you set at. And that is Pro Audio. So your recording device, your camera, and your post-production software should all be set to that. It's an end-to-end workflow standard. It's just like frame rates with video or resolution. So just be aware of that. Okay, like I say, I'm going to remove this temporarily just for the purposes of the next part of the demonstration. So you press the menu button and it gets into the menu. Who'd have thought? And then you use the up and down scroll wheel on the side to navigate through the menu. And the same with cameras. Parts of this are really important, and parts of it you can kind of ignore. So it's all about knowing which parts you need to go into. But obviously it does help if you know the menu pretty well. It helps if you read the manual, but let's face it, if you had, then you probably wouldn't be watching this video. So this video and the document that I have on Moodle, which refers to the H5, is sort of a substitute for reading the entire manual. So yeah, that being said, to reset the recorder, we go into the system setting, which is usually towards the end, and then we have some options there, and we can go down to factory reset, and we press yes. What happens then is it says done, it says goodbye, a bit rude, turns off, and we must turn it on again. How dare Zoom make us do that? And now it's asking us to set the date and time. And this is pretty useful for your metadata. Metadata is really important because it's going to help you stay organized in post, but I'm not going to do it now. And it's giving us a warning we've got no SD card. So I've just reset this now, and if you're really keen-eyed, you might see that in the bottom left corner of the device, it actually has now changed to WAV 44.1 kilohertz at 16-bit. Now that's CD quality. Remember CDs? I think I've got a few of them lying around somewhere. That's the resolution that you are listening to when you listen to a CD, the digital resolution. And it's pretty good. It's just that for recording on set, we want a higher sample rate and bit depth. It's going to give us better dynamic range, ultimately more dynamics in the sound, and just better resolution. So that's one of the things that we're going to want to change straight away. Another thing is formatting the card. So let's just have a look at how to do both of those things. Press Menu. Now the card settings would live in SD card, quite logically. And it's saying no SD card. Okay, well let's put one in. This is number 13, so hopefully this doesn't go wrong. And now that it's in there, I can go to Format, and it says, are you sure? And then it formats the card. Really, really important to do that before you begin filming, because you want to have as much time on there, as much space in the card as possible, and you don't want other people's recordings getting confused with your own. So again, I'm going to take that out because I've got some important stuff on there that I don't want to delete. And it's very important, like I say, to change that resolution of recording back to Pro Audio, which is 48 kilohertz at 24 bits. So to do that, go into Menu Rec, not to be confused with Rec Mode. We go to Rec, Rec Format, and then minimum you want to go 48 kilohertz at 24 bits. And there's no point going much beyond that because you'll just end up using more space more quickly on the card. Okay, so select that, and now it's changed. That's great. Pretty straightforward. And by the way, just so you know, the Rec mode, what that means is you can either change the mode between multi-file, which is essentially 2 onboard plus 2 external. You can change that to just stereo, which is either these two or these two. So multi-file gives us a nice 4-channel display on the home screen. Left, right, 1, 2. Whereas if we go into stereo file, then we simply get left, right, or 1, 2, depending on which microphones we have selected. We'll come to that in just a moment. We're still looking at the menu for now. So it's really important with condenser mics that they receive power in order to activate the capacitor of the microphone. In other words, if you're using a condenser microphone, such as a shotgun on a boom, then it needs to have power or it won't work and you'll have no signal whatsoever. So this is called phantom power, and usually condenser microphones require 48 volts of phantom power. So if we have a condenser microphone connected into the Zoom here at the bottom, in here in XLR 1 or XLR 2, then we must send it power, otherwise it won't activate the microphone's electrics and it won't detect signal and pass it through to the recorder. So that applies to any condenser microphone. However, lapels, they use batteries, so they're able to power in a different way. However, if we want to send it phantom power here on the H5, we simply go in through the menu. We go to Menu In, Out, and we're looking for In Phantom. So we've got the voltage. Some microphones accept a different amount. However, go 48, and we simply choose which input we want it on. If we've got a boom mic in 1 and a lapel on 2, we can just select 1 for the boom, or we can go all, and it will send phantom power to both. The downside is that it drains power slightly faster than, well, actually sometimes a lot faster than if it wasn't sending phantom power. But you're going to plan that in advance. Obviously, you're going to have fresh batteries, and if there's breaks throughout the day, you'll be on top of that power management with your batteries. So that's phantom power. So we've already covered record mode. So that's pretty handy there to be able to know that we can record simultaneously. There is another feature here we just have to cover, just so that you're aware. Down to record. If it's in stereo mode, in the menu section, in the in-out parts, there's an option called mono mix. So what this does is, if we have only one microphone coming into the bottom of the recorder, but we want to listen back to that microphone in 2 ears on the headphones. By the way, the headphone goes in here. If we want to listen back to check or monitor our audio with 2 ears, but we've only got 1 input in the bottom, if we enable mono mix, it basically mixes that one mono source across both channels of the recorder so that we're able to monitor it clearly in headphones. So that can be quite useful in that situation. Otherwise, leave it off, because if you have two different microphones going in here, it's really handy to have those microphones going to one to the left here and one to the right here, because it means you can actually hear if there's a noise, if there's a rustling sound maybe on a lapel mic, you can hear that it's on actor A as opposed to actor B. So just bear that in mind. And the F4, another advantage of the Zoom F4 recorder, it has many more options for controlling how you're monitoring back audio in real time, because essentially it's a more powerful mixer. So whereas on this, you've basically just got that option there. So a few other options to look at. There's some tools in there, musical tools, and you can generate a sync tone, for example, if you go into menu and you go into rec. You've got this sound marker if you wanted to stamp your recordings. Maybe you want to send that to the camera. Well, if you were able to send an output, it does have a line out, I believe. Yep, there. So you could, let me just show you there. You could modify this with an adapter so that you're able to send to a camera from the line out here. Bit fiddly, but possible. And then you could use a sound marker to sync up if you wanted to. And there's also another feature that you might find useful called pre-record. And that means basically when you press the record button on the Zoom, which we're going to get to now in a minute, it will actually capture sort of retroactively 2 seconds of audio before you press that button. And the way it does it is that it sort of constantly caches that 2 seconds of memory. And just in case they go before you're ready on set, you can press record and it kind of captures just as the actor dropped the first, let's say, syllable of the word or sound effect. So that covers all of the important points of the menu, but I would say just have a little playthrough, if not only to become comfortable just navigating through the menu in a hurry, which is really useful on set. Now let's take a look at all the external features. Now that we know what's going on inside the Zoom, we're able to go through the external features and know what we're doing here. And the main purpose of these external features is that you've got everything that you need to right there at your fingertips when you're actually in that heat of the moment. You don't really want to be digging in the menu too much when you're recording. However, you will be changing the gain, the input gain levels, and basically stop starting, and you might be playing back to check on the recording after you've taken it. So it basically has the most important features for on-set on the front of the Zoom as opposed to buried in the menu. So with this recording device, as per any other recording device or a camera, you must be very aware of the input gain settings. In other words, you want to record audio at the best signal to noise ratio as possible. Aim for this Goldilocks zone between -24 and -12 dB. That region there, if you're aiming for audio to be around about that level, it's going to be nice and clear and loud enough, but not too loud that you'll have distortion. And you'll have a bit of room in case there is an unexpected loud noise. Hopefully it won't pop over that 0 dB point of pain. So all the theory of recording in that region for the best possible signal is really important here, as it is with any other device. And it's worth emphasizing that you need to set audio for each individual microphone's input. It's not a master setting that is like a magic wand that you wave it and it just fixes everything that's feeding into the device. Every microphone will have a different sensitivity, and you will need to accordingly adjust the input gain of each microphone. Also, it's going to be in a physical different position, so you just might have different levels going into one mic than another. For the purposes of the demonstration here, I've got a wireless receiver, and I'm just going to connect the XLR of the receiver into one of the two inputs at the bottom of the H5. So 3-pin XLR in there. And let's take a look now at what's going on. First thing to do is be aware of which microphones you're using on the H5. In other words, be aware of which channels are selected. One of the worst mistakes you can make on this particular device is you think you're recording from the wireless receiver, whereas actually it's recording from the microphones at the top here. So be very conscious of that. Left and right will activate these mics, whereas 1 and 2 will activate the 2 inputs on the bottom. And like I say, you can record all of them at the same time if you put it in multi-mode, but you might not always need to do that. So we've armed the track for recording here. And after we've done this, we need to set the input level of the track. Otherwise, we're not going to have any significant signal there. So with the Zoom, you don't always get level until you have an SD card in there for a start. So let's pop that in. But also sometimes you don't get the level until you press the record button. And this depends on the model of the Zoom. So here, if we arm the tracks, then we get that level. But depending on the setting or the model of the Zoom, sometimes you have to actually put it in record ready mode, and then you get the level, and then the audio comes through the headphones, which you should be wearing at all times, because if you're not wearing headphones, you won't hear problems, and you're less likely to spot, for example, if you're using the onboard microphones incorrectly, as opposed to the inputs down here. Okay, so as soon as I've armed these channels down here, then you can see the audio is slamming through, it's really loud, and going to have bad signal. So in this case, it's not reaching 0 dB, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not distorting, because there could be aggressive limiting or compression going on, and the audio simply might be coming in too hot from the receiver. It might be set to output line level, and the Zoom is expecting microphone level. So just be careful there and listen carefully, and you should be able to hear if there's problems with your sound or not. So if you let your ears be the judge, then you can't really go wrong. If it sounds good and you're recording that, then that's perfect. In this case, I'm just going to adjust the meter so that as I'm talking, and I'm purposely trying to talk quite loud here for the demonstration, as I'm talking here, the level doesn't too often go beyond -12. And remember, with decibels, it's an inverse meter. So the closer you get to 0, the louder it gets. And it goes down to -infinity, but it's an inverse meter, so that -12 is louder than -24. So I want it round about between -24 and -12. And bear in mind that different recording devices have their own view of what that range of decibels is. So you always should try and look for the figures instead of just looking at a level that's going halfway up. And sometimes that means you actually have to go onto a different view, such as the F4. You have to make sure that you're on a certain screen to actually see those figures at the bottom there. Okay, so I'm confident on my transmitter that I've got a good amount of preamplification on the gain, which means that it's got a nice setting there. The receiver is set correctly, so I'm getting a nice amount of AF on my receiver. And in this case, I'm wearing a second lapel so that I'm feeding both the camera and I'm feeding here. So in this case, I know that the wireless gear is set correctly. So that would be the first thing to check if it was sounding distorted. And now I can look onto the Zoom to make sure that's at the right level for the incoming level. So with the Zoom, we have a gain adjustment pot here, or an encoder. And that's for the microphones on the head of the Zoom. And then we've got 2 here that are protected by this little metal pole here that are for inputs 1 and 2. And in this case, they're trying to make it easier for you to choose the right microphone. Sometimes some devices have one pot that is shared over 2 inputs, and you have to select which input between 1 and 2 you're actually adjusting. But in this case, it's got a separate pot for input 1 and 2. So again, just good to be aware of that. So if I change input 2, it does nothing here, whereas if I change input 1, it goes from quiet to way too loud. And it kind of shows you that it's got a problem because it starts to flicker the light. The red LED there is flickering, trying to flag an issue with you. Whereas a solid LED just shows you that it's selected. So in this case, we've got Monomix turned on so that input 1 is actually feeding the left and the right sides of the stereo recording channels. And I can also listen to that in headphones in 2 ears instead of just having it on the left side or on the right side. So Monomix is quite handy. And in this case, I'm ready to go. So I'm going to press record here. I'm going to leave that go for a few seconds. You know it's recording because of 2 things. One, you get that red solid LED where the record button is. But my favorite way of being confident that it's recording is simply by looking at the timer. The timer is running and I can see the file is writing there because of that running timer. So I'm pretty happy, although I haven't reset my recording resolution to 48 kilohertz at 24 bits after I did that factory reset. So that was a bit naughty, but just pointing that out because that's an easy thing to forget about, even if you're aware of Pro Audio Resolution. And I'm going to stop the file there. And because I already have a file from yesterday, I've got multiple files now, and they're actually recorded at different resolutions. So I've got some WAV 48 kilohertz 24-bit content on there. The one that I've just recorded is a different resolution, but you can play them back quite easily on set. There's a speaker at the back of the Zoom if you don't have amplification for monitors that you can actually play, and it will come out of the back of the Zoom. So just bear in mind that the volume of the Zoom on the side here, that refers to the output headphone volume, which won't change the volume that it's recording at, just the volume that you're listening at that recorded level back. And on different models, again, sometimes you've got the input gain on the side here, and it's called input gain. So not to be confused with volume, which always tends to refer to output volume. And one last thing about the Zoom, when you actually record files onto the SD card and you put it in the computer, it's not so easy to find those files sometimes. Depending on whether you've got it on multi or stereo mode, it will be in different folders, and they generate folders within those folders from 1 to 10. Most of the time it's in folder 1, but sometimes randomly it'll appear in folder 10. So don't worry, as long as you've recorded and the timer has been running, it will write it to the disk. The only thing that will cause you stress is if the power suddenly dies during recording and doesn't have time to wrap up that file properly, then you've got big problems. So always press stop if you think the battery's going to go, or you're coming off mains and you think someone's going to kill the power. And that way the Zoom has time to write to the file, and it's much easier to do some ADR recording then for a couple of lines than losing the whole lot. So just be aware of that. And that pretty much covers the H5. Let's look at the F4.